This is KVR, Kaijuvision Radio, Episode 47, Part 3 of 3, Godzilla Anime Series, Godzilla, Bigger Than Human Existence. Hello Kaiju and Tokusatsu fans, and welcome to Kaijuvision Radio, a podcast about the appreciation of Kaiju and Tokusatsu movies and discovering their historical and cultural value. I'm Brian Scherschel. This episode is split into 3 parts. This current one you're on is the related topic, what I'm calling Godzilla, Bigger Than Human Existence. Daniel and I will delve deeper into this unexpected and meaningful story that's in the anime trilogy, Godzilla, Planet of the Monsters, Godzilla, City on the Edge of Battle, and Godzilla, the Planet Eater. At the beginning of Part 3, Metfis, in his monologue, his creepy, scary monologue at the beginning, he says how the Exif have intervened in Earth's history repeatedly. What do you think that's implying?
Man, that line really made me think a lot about like what they could have done and when they could have done it, because the first thing it made me think of was the whole ancient alien thing, and maybe they were intervening and interceding at certain points during our history to make sure that we got to the point where our planet could be eaten. And that's kind of what I took away from that, was the Exif are apparently a very, very ancient old race, and there's no indication that they're capable of like interdimensional or time travel or anything like that. So no. It's just kind of implied that they're very, very old, and it's very possible that in order to create the right conditions on planets in the far distant reaches of the universe, they send certain emissaries at certain points during specific eras during a planet's main species, biological and mental evolution, and give them things to progress their society along to the point where they get to that inevitable moment when they start making their own monsters and they get the planet just right, and then they show up and get Ghidorah right. All fed.
Yes, because it's about getting Earth ready for harvesting.
Yeah, and that's a creepy word.
Yeah, it is.
I don't like the word harvesting when it comes to alien stuff, man.
No.
That's terrifying. Like the fact that a planet or the people on it, or definitely the people on it, could be harvested like crops for something beyond our comprehension, and that we're basically being toyed with. And we are, it reminds me of Final Wars, where the alien guy keeps calling us cattle. Yeah.
I think I counted that. I think it was 11 times.
Yeah,
I forget.
It was a lot
I know
of times.
I counted it, and it's in the episode for Final Wars. I don't remember how many it was. It was a lot.
I don't remember. But it was a lot. I don't remember what the number was either. I remember that, but
I had little tick marks, hash marks I was doing when I was watching it one time. But okay, so they've been intervening in human history and in Earth's history, and I was like, okay, so are you basically the ones who are creating all these messiahs or false messiahs, depending on who it is? And that makes society progress, because they're speaking you're basically like Haru. You're like a conduit for their religion to get through. And I was like, okay, so who are we talking here? Are we talking like Abraham Lincoln or something? Or like Jesus, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, JFK even, like Hitler, Napoleon? What are we talking here? Because you could go all kinds with what Medfees says here, you could be going all kinds of different directions.
Yeah. I'm not saying it was aliens, but it was aliens. So it's interesting to think, like, because
it could be people who preached equality, because that's one thing. It doesn't
just have to be religion.
Because that's what the Exif preach. But also it's people who preach sacrifice and who suppress individuality. And so you could be using various historical figures who have propounded those theories and that way of living, or like various historical figures who promoted racial purity or something like that, or just in general people who caused wars.
Yeah.
Because that brings about more destruction. Or like scientists. Like Einstein, because there's Einstein's formulas, E equals MC squared right there on a chalkboard behind Haruo.
Yeah, exactly.
So, like, are we talking like scientific figures who realized technologically the same things that the Exif did when they developed technology, to the point where they saw that the universe is not infinite. That's what they found.
Crazy.
And that's the part of their religion. And so that's interesting too. The whole thing about their religion is about being freed from fear and despair, because life is fear and despair to them. They're worshiping fate. The universe is finite. Everything's going to die anyway. So seek destruction. Make planets ripe for the destruction god to come and consume it. Did you ever see I Heart Huckabees?
Sadly, no, I have not.
I Heart Huckabees is one of those movies where characters encounter different philosophies and they start living by them, and then all this destruction chaos happens.
Interesting. Yeah.
You know, there's a woman who's kind of hot in it, and she suddenly starts wearing, you know, all these frumpy, bizarre clothes, because she's like, it doesn't matter. Everything's connected. It doesn't matter what I wear. There's this French woman who is a philosopher, essentially, and she preaches this philosophy of screw it. Life is meaningless. Just embrace the meaninglessness. That's a philosophy that people embrace. And so, like, it ends up that it's a mix of the philosophies that is the best balance. But it's almost like somebody at Toho or whatever watched I Heart Huckabees and was like, hey, there's all these different philosophies at work here. But the Exif religion is scary-ish. And what I found is that there's this term called entropy pessimism. And it's generally like an economic term. And it's connected to the eventual heat death of the universe, where work can no longer be performed and out of anything left anymore. The theory is that human activity can only speed up the inevitable death of the planet. So, you know, we consume resources on Earth, and it's turned into trash and stuff like that, and expended energy that can't be used again. Natural resources are used, the environment breaks down until Earth reaches maximum entropy in accordance with the rest of the universe. Universal economic and environmental and human decline are impossible to escape. And another term for this is depressive realism. Which that's another great term.
Makes sense. Yeah.
But it's like this religion is entropy pessimism. Like it's somebody made a religion.
It's interesting.
And it is kind of like this depressive realism where it's like, okay, sure, the universe might eventually, you know, stop expanding and then collapse in on itself again.
The parallels there are definitely there because of just how this is a religion that embraces destruction. It embraces the inevitability of destruction. I think a big word when it comes to the Exif and their philosophy on things is the word inevitability. Mm-hmm. Quite frankly, there's almost all of the philosophies presented in these films tie back into the inevitability of things, of something or things. The Bila Solido have the same way.
Yeah, and civilizational cycles. It's impossible to break. And what happens in the post-credits sequence of Part 3?
They're smiling. They're definitely older. This is definitely way off in the future, and one of them is certainly smiling.
Yeah.
Now, that moment right there, if there's anything that is, like, very ambiguous in all of this trilogy, it is that ending. Because I've seen people interpret 1,000 different things out of what could be happening in that moment. I looked at some stills from the scene again and paid attention to some of the dialogue, and I came away with, which is that what we're seeing might not be a bad thing at all. It might actually be a good thing and the fruit of Haruo's labors, because to me the really big altar looked like one of the vultures.
Yeah.
It looked very much like a vulture, and so to me it kind of looked like they might be honoring Haruo's sacrifice. If you listen to what they say, you know, they're basically talking to this altar and saying, accept his sacrifices, creepy things, fearful things that were scared. They mentioned bugs, I think, something like that, like insects that they don't like, things that scare them, things that make them afraid. And they're basically taking those things and they're using them as sacrifices onto this altar. It got me thinking, so this is obviously a roughly half a generation later because we've got all these kids. Mm-hmm. The twins are older. What if Haruo's sacrifice has given a new generation of humanity essentially a figurehead upon whom they can release all of their negativity to? Like, his sacrifice is represented by the effigy of the vulture. They're taking things like anger and hatred and fear
and they're
releasing them and discarding them onto the altar so that Haruo's spirit, or whatever they think of him on an ethereal plane perhaps, can take them away from the civilization so they can continue to be at peace. And I thought that's an interesting interpretation, because my first thought looking at it was, oh God, humanity's going down the same path again. And it's just inevitable at this point. They're starting to build things and they're starting to get negative and hate. And the more I kind of looked at it again and I backed it up and watched it and I thought, this could be not a bad thing. And I don't know if there's any one concrete answer to what that last image means. I think it could be open to either interpretation. I think either could be right. Like, I've seen a couple of fans online outright call these films like anti-religious, and I don't know if they're necessarily anti-religious. I just think they're providing an interesting critical point of view on how religion can be misused if placed in the hands of a leader that's not a good person, or an alien in this case.
Yeah.
It's essentially a story about the dangers of being too confident in whatever dogma you're preaching, no matter what it is. I mean, there are wonderful people in this world that preach lovely, wonderful things about life in all kinds of different religions, Christianity and Judaism and Islam and Buddhism and everywhere around the world, Hinduism, that people that preach these wonderful, lovely things, but there's always the possibility of it being misused in a horrible, horrible way that takes advantage of people's faith.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, but without the religious aspect, specifically, transferred over to the Bila Solido, because right now we find ourselves on planet Earth in real life in a world where we are obsessed by and dependent on technology, and in a way, don't we revere it?
Yeah.
Don't we revere the technology? I mean, this podcast that we're talking on right now is the result of trial and error and the amazing technology that's been developed over the last several decades that allows things like this to happen. It's amazing to think that we are so dependent. And in that way, how different are we from the Bila Solido? It's interesting to think about how the parallels work. It actually makes these films, for all of their high sci-fi and the big concepts, very in futuristic setting, very, very timely. Mm-hmm. As you mentioned at the beginning of the show, how timely a lot of these things really, truly are.
Yeah, the mood is really right on.
The mood is, yes, we're very much in a very divisive world right now, not just a society, but societies where we have conflicting philosophies, basically bashing each other over the head with different philosophies. We live in a world that kind of feels like it could crumble down around us if we don't pick something. But, the nature of the world we live in is that there can't just be one philosophy.
Yeah.
There has to be many, and there has to be debates over the merits of each one, because is there such a thing as a perfect philosophy? If the Godzilla trilogy has taught us anything, it's that the answer is no. Mm-hmm. There is no one perfect philosophy, because the Bila Solidians have this thing that can kill Godzilla and save the world. And of course, they're doing it for themselves. But even that notwithstanding, it has the potential to be just as bad as Godzilla, if not worse, but just in a different way. There's the fault there. They're too overly confident in their technology. The Exif are too overly confident in the fact that their chosen conduit will sacrifice everything for them. They've underestimated the humanity of this person that, I think they didn't really think he'd do it. They thought they got this easy target.
Mm-hmm. And the way civilizational cycles work in this, the inescapability of it is extremely interesting, because he says how once a society has embraced development and technology and civilization at a certain point, that opens the door to destruction.
Yes.
That's scary.
That is scary. It It's very crazy.
In the end, he destroys technology in order to try to do what? Eliminate progress. He's trying to stop the unstoppable, even at his death. Because this guy's been trying to stop the unstoppable the whole time. Whether it's Godzilla or something else, he's been trying to stop the unstoppable.
But it's definitely true, because he's literally fighting against things that cannot be fought. He's fighting against a force of nature that also represents technology gone awry, that also represents all of these different things. And he's fighting against a religious dogma, and he's fighting against an over-reliance on technology. He's fighting against, humans that human A believes one thing, human B believes a different thing. And there's just no right answer. His inevitable death is to prevent inevitability. Like, he's dying to prevent it. At least he thinks he can. But does he? Who knows?
Because his whole objective in life is to fight the cycle and to stop the cycle from happening. And to reverse it. In the case of Godzilla, he wants to reverse the cycle by getting rid of Godzilla and going backwards. And when he is fighting against all of these things, he's trying to stop the cycle from continuing. He's unable to. And then Metphies, what is his thing? Make the cycle happen. Encourage the cycle to happen. Speed it up. If you go with the whole idea that they have been manipulating Earth from the beginning, you sort of explain the huge runaway technological advancement that's happened on Earth. And you can say, oh, okay, that's what they were doing. Is they were encouraging more development, encouraging more progress, encouraging technology, making time go faster, in a way. The Bila Saludo, their idea is to freeze the cycle by losing themselves and becoming technology.
Exactly. It's just opposite ends of the same coin in a weird way.
It's like the Bila Saludo are sort of the intermediary, and then Haruo's like the outer person trying to end the cycle, and then the Exif are inside, and they're trying to encourage the cycle to continue. That's one thing about these characters. They're not typical characters in a way because they're not developed in the same way. They're developed in the sense that they are philosophies. And the direction that they're going in the face of this cycle and what they're trying to do to stop it or encourage it. The Exif religion, there are overtones of radical state Shinto, specifically the preaching of sacrifice and the emphasis on the suppression of individuality. Specifically those things. I got a little bit of a vibe of state Shinto in the Exif, the ultimate sacrifice, and especially how Metphies talks about sacrifice, because he considers it glorious to sacrifice yourself in killing Godzilla. Now, obviously, there's more going on with his motives than that, but he also, remember, he brings out the people who have died. And they're telling him what? We sacrificed ourselves. Why aren't you? Like, just point blank.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of the way things worked in Japan during the war. Was, your brothers are sacrificing themselves, doing, kamikaze attacks and stuff. You need to follow in their glorious sacrifice. You need to follow what they did.
Exactly. That's an interesting interpretation.
And, also, he's the last kamikaze.
Yeah, that one I definitely picked up on obvious. watching the start.
And
that's
so once
very
he's
much
gone, there will be peace. He's the last part of the war. And this imagery of this, it reads differently to Americans when they see this kind of imagery. But I would have to say that if you're Japanese, you're going to interpret this in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, he literally kamikazed at the end.
Yeah.
That's what he did.
Yeah, it's obvious,
Yeah, it is very obvious. And I mean, I mentioned Jinguji from Atragon. The sentence in Atragon where Jinguji is accused of being an old dusty suit of armor. Of course, in that film, Jinguji takes his metaphorical armor off, and decides to put that behind him for the greater good of humanity. In a weird way, Haruo almost does that. He does what he does for humanity, but he does it without taking his armor off.
Yeah.
in a weird way. He has to take, like, I don't think he could if he tried.
No.
Maybe he did try, but there's just no way his armor is ever going to come off. He's going to be a dusty old war relic obsessed with killing Godzilla. And there is no place for that in this world that he knows has to exist in order to keep humanity safe. Like,
yeah.
In the weirdest way, like his entire thing about killing Godzilla isn't so much because they killed his parents. It's because, as we mentioned before, Godzilla killing, like, it represents the failure of humanity and the downfall of humanity. And perhaps he sees in the Hotua and their peaceful ways and, you know, like, lack of technology, that life he did want for humanity. You know, like, that's what he wanted the whole time. And he just thought it meant killing Godzilla, but maybe it didn't. You know, maybe it meant killing the thing that felt that Godzilla needed to die. And of course, that's him.
It's a collision between two realities.
Yeah. Yes.
It's his reality is finally dying. And in that way, I also find a connection to, like, the war. I mean, that reality changed and it disappeared, essentially. And I don't just see Shinto, though, in the Exif religion, though. I also see fundamentalist Christianity, specifically the kinds of Christians who all they do is talk about the Book of Revelation all day long. I see that.
Yeah, too.
Because there's definitely a part of Christianity that's a bit of, like, kind of like a doomsday cult. I got that vibe
some
with
individuals
the Exif
like that
for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked about
like a doomsday cult aspect.
Heaven's Gate and all the doomsday cults and such. Like, I have a friend who had a family member who was in a very Christian-oriented Y2K doomsday cult, where essentially this group of people was convinced that the world was going to end and Jesus was going to come when the clock struck midnight on January 1st, the year 2000.
He doesn't have a clock.
And oh man, it's strange, you know, and it's, you know, obviously it didn't happen. I feel like every single year there's a group of people that say the world, based on all of these very in-depth calculations, the world is going to end at exactly this time on exactly this day and exactly this year. And of course we get there and it's fine.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. And the thing that I really took away from the Exif is that any religion, be it Christianity or any other, what have you, can be, as I mentioned before, corrupted and, you know, kind of turned into this not so positive thing, you know, for people who are, you know, willing to hear that. And it just depends on who's doing the communicating. And there's a lot of persuasive dictator in Metfeast.
Yeah.
There's a lot of sweet, not so much sweet talking, but well-spoken. I just want to trust this guy. He seems so nice, you know. He seems like he knows what he's talking about. And if you're and again, I'm going to use the word gullible again.
Susceptible.
Just like a susceptible person, yeah, to that. Just if you're a person that hears that kind of the way of thinking, and you're like, well, he seems like a nice guy. I'll throw money at this guy, or I'll join his cult. To each their own, right? But it's definitely, it opens up an avenue for people to be taken advantage of.
Yeah.
You know, there are people out there that preach this thing and that thing, and their intentions are genuinely good and noble things, and they do want to help people. But, you know, every once in a while you'll find someone who's willing to take horrible, hideous advantage of people's faith. You know, this sacred thing that people basically use as a foundation for trust in other human beings to hurt them.
Yeah.
And in that way, I don't see, you know, all of these films, Planet Eater, as anti-Christian or anything like that. I think it's just a cautionary tale about just, you know, be careful who you listen to. Be sure that, you know, when you join that cult, that, you know, they're one of the good cults. You know, like join a nice cult. But like in all seriousness, it's I see it as just an exploration about how these things can be exploited and how other people can be exploited by that smooth talking cult leader. Mm-hmm. So in that way, I mean, it would almost be like saying that the film is anti-technology, because the Bilusalido do the exact same thing.
Yeah, I mean, you could also say that this is anti-technology.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's just the reason that people are saying Christian specifically is that religion is quite simply, just a more sensitive topic than technology, because not everybody is religious, but most people use some form of technology.
Yeah, not everybody is the Unabomber.
Yeah, not everybody's the Unabomber, but there's certainly more people that use cell phones in this world than there are people that don't. But, like cell phones are like a thing. Technology is so integrated into our lives. And for a lot of people, religion is. And for a lot of other people, religion isn't. But even an atheist probably has a cell phone. Like, I feel like there are probably people that I haven't seen yet that have looked at this film and said, oh, it's anti-technology. But I've seen a lot more. It's anti-religion, specifically Christianity. I've seen that stuff kind of thrown around. And I think it's probably just because religion is a much more kind of sensitive thing to people that people hold dear than technology, because technology is an accepted thing for most people. Religion isn't necessarily accepted by everybody, depending on where you live in the world. It could be religion A, B, C, D, E, F, G, whatever, but not everybody is religious, A, and B, people who are religious might not be as religious as other people. So depending on who you talk to, it's either more or less a sensitive topic. You can rail against technology all you want, and technology's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just not. It's everywhere.
So the Adam character, he's one of the ones that ties up to the cult in the third film. He is actually killed in the process when Ghidorah is birthed on Earth, when that shadow comes down and starts cutting everybody to pieces. It's kind of interesting they chose that name for him.
That is interesting.
Possible biblical connection. I couldn't escape that. But also, there's a connection to the whole Garden of Eden aspect of Christianity, too, where isn't like the optimal state of being returned to the Garden of Eden state at the end? Minus Godzilla. Minus Godzilla, which is actually just looked at as another large creature.
Yeah,
by the Hotuans. Like they don't have the same perception of Godzilla that the others do. So
no, Godzilla,
it's almost like
Godzilla
we're returning to some sort of Garden of Eden-ish state.
A very simple paradise wherein the thing that the people from modern times see as the enemy, something to be defeated, to the Hotua, it's something to be coexisted with.
Yeah.
And they've been doing it for thousands and thousands of years, and they haven't been killed. Whatever they're doing is working.
So they're living under a sometimes wrathful god.
Yeah, a sometimes wrathful god.
Just like the god in.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting, and I mean that's an interesting way of looking at it. Humanity has essentially regressed back to just a couple of individuals.
Living very primitively.
Metphis is very Satan-y in a weird way. He's very much like that tempting snake that whispers in your ear in a weird way.
Yeah, he's not some evil stereotype. He's a manipulative kind of evil that reveals himself late. It's more evil than people think, I believe. The Exif believe that Haruo is so inhuman that he will worship Ghidorah when the time comes. Like, they think that his hatred of Godzilla makes him this inhuman. And so they get humans to believe in victory against Godzilla. That's the fake part of the religion. And then the real religion, though, is what? The Doomsday Cult that brings about destruction.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the very nature of bad religion. You're preaching one thing, but it's BS, and you really have a complete other intentions about what's going on and what you're going to do. Yeah, that's very interesting. It's interesting that Adam gets massacred at the outset of this, and that his name's Adam. It's very of all the names you could choose in the whole English language of.
He chose Adam. He chose Adam. That's an interesting thought. I wonder what was going on there, because there's definitely little touches of various religions here and there.
Yeah. I don't think this is particularly against any kind of particular religion. I think it's actually against most. I think it kind of is one of those things where it's an equal opportunity
critique.
kind of critique. Yeah, and And that's one thing that the Godzilla movies often don't do, is they don't get that specific.
Yeah.
When there's an opinion about something.
Yeah.
But that's also interesting. For those of you who are old enough to play Super Nintendo, and there's this little game, and it's called Chrono Trigger. Some of you might have heard of it. I played it so many hours you would not even know. In that story, there is this asteroid kind of thing that crashes to Earth 65 million years ago. Then it is actually a monster that is waiting for Earth to ripen to a certain point. Then doomsday occurs. Lavos, which is called, it comes out and causes doomsday and takes over Earth and consumes it.
Sounds familiar.
There's also a part in connection in that game as well, where there is a city that is in the sky. It is this civilization that has found technology. That technology opens the door to Lavos being awakened, which is opening the doorway to destruction.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I never played that game, so
The story's so
I've heard
cool.
of it,
It's one of the best video game stories ever, to be quite honest. But you can see plenty of stuff on YouTube that has this. I couldn't help but notice that connection. But there are lots of stories like this where it's sort of like a civilizational cycle. But it's not common, but it happens.
No, but it does happen, and when it's done well, it's done like really well too.
Yeah.
Like stories like that are, like you said, they don't pop up all the time, but they open up a lot of potential for that kind of a critique, that critique of civilization, the critique of religion or technology. I mean, if you want to put the effort into writing that kind of a thing into a story about the cyclical nature of civilization and humanity as a whole, or just like races in general, you can put that stuff in there. And I think that this trilogy of films does it really, really well. And it's so cerebral and so philosophical that in a lot of ways it's really intelligent. It's really intelligent. And the thing I really like about a lot of these aspects is that they're really not kind of spoon-fed to you.
No.
You know, they're kind of put out there, and then you have to think about it for yourself, which is the nature of philosophy.
Yeah.
Thinking about it for yourself, thinking in general, is what philosophy is. It's the mental science of thinking. It's what you think about, and it's a way of thinking, and it could be a way of life. And it's certainly the individual ones are the respective ways of life for the characters in these films. You know, it's really, really cool to see any film kind of tackling this. But it's really exciting that it's three Godzilla films, because
at the end you're like, wait, did Godzilla actually just do that? Bravo. There's another connection too. Did you notice any connection to the story of Icarus with the ending of this film?
I didn't, but now that you mention it.
He flies towards the sun, and the sun burns his wings off.
He flew too close.
He flew into Godzilla with the one thing left on Earth that can fly. Because when he destroyed that technology, he destroyed flight.
That's fascinating.
But Icarus was what? Icarus was about ambition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
I love thinking about this kind of stuff.
Me too. Me too. Like, there's so many interesting connections to be made, and it gets to that weird point where you start thinking, was this intentional on the part of the filmmakers, or am I injecting my own?
Those vultures certainly look like Icarus.
They do look like do look like the Icarus wing. The wings that he flies on.
Is interesting symbolically. There's also connection to Westworld. Again, there's a part in Westworld where in season 2 about how there is a project to make humans less human by integrating technology into them, or basically to put their brains into technology. The purpose of that is so that the negative aspects of humanity can be ameliorated and eliminated. So self-destructive or destructive tendencies, selfishness, those kinds of things would be eliminated, which is what? It's an attempt to have for humanity to make a more perfect version of itself. And it's an incredibly interesting concept. And Westworld goes so many places with philosophical stuff like this. It's just mind-blowing. But that is very interesting. And in Westworld, it's well known that the humans, overall, humanity in Westworld, they suck. They're violent, they're indulgent, they're selfish, they're murderous, they're monsters. So that therefore there was this project created to try to stop humanity from doing this and be more constructive, and that is in a lot of ways what the Bila Saludo are trying to do. Is they are trying to create a more perfect version of themselves. So this it's a little bit of a difference, but really it is about making a perfected version of your own race.
That feeling that you're not as perfect as you could be without technology playing some kind of a hand in yourself, your physicality, how you think, how you feel, like the feeling that we're not as good as we could be.
Yeah.
And that we want to get as good as we could be.
Yeah, we need to save Earth because humans are destroying it. So we need to become a logical version, a more human, trying to make ourselves more human. And that goes also to Blade Runner, which I would never want to leave that out. Because the replicants, what is the saying? More human than humans.
Mm-hmm.
It's about what humanity was trying to do is in the replicants, you're creating a more perfect version of humans to do work for you. But and kill people for you. But also there's that.
Yeah.
I don't want to leave Godzilla out of this because what happens in the end with Godzilla? Godzilla wins. He defeats everything. But in the same way, we're kind of accepting of Godzilla as just what? He's part of the cycle. He is the doom that is open, that the door is open to when development goes far enough and scientific advancement goes far enough, and he's the restraint that is on humanity.
Yeah.
Because of their sins. He's
the
punishment to humanity's desire to constantly prosper. Civilization reaches a peak and then opens the door to Godzilla. And how should civilization face that destruction that is coming? That's the question. And then we have various characters trying to answer that question. How should civilization face death and destruction that's coming? Well, Hiro wants to destroy Godzilla to stop the cycle. And the Exif want Godzilla to be created in order to continue and bring the cycle to its end. But that's how Godzilla fits into all of this. He is that answer, that retribution, that punishment for humanity's endless desire for progress and prosperity.
Yeah, well said. That's exactly what it is. If this trilogy has accomplished anything, it's to take that concept that I talked about before of the inevitability of Godzilla and just take that, which had been a part of the plots of many of the previous movies, and just ramp it up to 11. Because if Godzilla was this inevitable, unstoppable thing in previous films, like, my God, he's 10 times that here. Because he's godlike, and he's always kind of had that godlike aspect to him. But it's really in this series of films that we kind of almost reach a logical kind of a end point for Godzilla on our planet in general, because you could almost take the scenario here and plug it into the end of any kaiju story, and it could end up there with humanity essentially peacefully subjugated under a planet that is ruled by the thing that we created and exists to remind us as a symbol of our own folly.
Yeah, and the fall of man, as in a biblical sense. The fall of man. Too. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it is like Godzilla is like Tomoyuki Tanaka himself, the man who created this character, once described Godzilla as the sacred beast of the apocalypse. He's not really demonic in that sense in this story. He doesn't really kind of feel like Satan has crawled out of the earth, but in a technological and societal apocalypse, Godzilla reigns above all of the other living things on the planet as its ruler and the cause of its destruction. But is Godzilla really the cause, or are we the cause? That's the interesting question, and there are a lot of Godzilla movies that have brought that up. That feeling of it's over. It's not, but it's over.
So it turns out that human evolution and human nature is a curse. Or essentially our own worst enemy, our curiosity about progress and science and getting out of primitive existence is a curse.
And it will inevitably lead to monsters. And, like we were saying before, this kind of a story has been told many times in many different mediums with many different kinds of characters and, different what have you. But, to me, the idea of a civilization ultimately and, again, inevitably ending in the birthing of monsters is really quite fascinating because, again, the world was apparently crawling with monsters before Godzilla showed up, and Godzilla was so insanely powerful that he killed the monsters that were all over the planet, and then he became the monster, the king of the monsters in this particular universe. Just crazy stuff. And it really makes you think about what the monster in question might be in a different story, or maybe even in real life. Will in our own reality that we live in, this kind of stuff is not going to lead to monsters being born, like actual physical giant Godzilla monsters. But what are the monsters that could be born? The metaphorical monsters, the symbolic monsters. What kind of creatures could be born from that?
There was an article that came out in the Washington Post. It is from October 30th, 2018. The title of it is Godzilla Back as Animation Has Human Drama, Fewer Monsters. This article was interesting because it gave us the insight into what the creators of the anime were trying to do. And we're hearing it right from them. They said, "We welcome getting bashed by the traditionalists. That proves more than anything we succeeded in creating something different." They say it was an intentional attempt to reach out to new audiences. They go on to describe, because they're two directors, they go on to describe how they call this Shakespearean human drama. They tackle complex issues, including the meaning of religion in a futuristic post-apocalyptic universe. Seshita, one of the directors, said that the film chose to interpret the Godzilla saga as what he called a kind of animism, or a godlike force that is bigger than human existence, a perspective he said was integral to Japanese culture and storytelling. Bingo, it's Japanese.
There you go.
Right there.
Yep, that's it.
I believe for a Japanese audience primarily, which I believe that's what Shin Godzilla was primarily
very much
for
so.
A Japanese audience. Shizuno, he said, "I'm not a Godzilla expert, and so I simply made a film I thought would be enjoyable." Well, it's really, really enjoyable in a dark kind of way that not everybody's going to go with, but he still did. The enjoyable part of it was being able to understand all of this that's going on and to be able to get these kind of conversations about something that a lot of people think is just a bunch of stupid monster fights or whatever, rubber suits and all that jazz. Mm-hmm. But we're able to go outside the box in such an interesting way with these.
Yeah. To that extent, I say good on you two guys for that. I mean, we're definitely sitting here we've had a very interesting conversation on what all of these things could potentially mean, and the finer points of a lot of it, the philosophy of a lot of it. And to me, if that's what they were hoping would happen, then hey, it's happening right now. So I think if that's what they wanted, then they've definitely succeeded in their mission, because that's what we're doing here. And I hope more fans, as time goes on, begin to engage in conversation about the stuff the way that you and I have been, because I really think the films lend themselves excellently to these kinds of conversations. I think that's what they were designed to do. They were designed to entertain, and they were also designed to make us think. I really, really appreciate that about them. So I'd like to think that they think they succeeded in their mission, because I certainly do.
Another aspect of inevitability, because that's what so much of this story is about,
That's right.
when all things are final. Ryota Fujitsu, an expert on Japanese animation, and I'm reading this from the article from WAPO, he said the animated trilogy was commendable for its visual beauty as well as for tackling Godzilla as a science fiction movie. He says, so much has been tried in the long-running series that taking a new approach was inevitable. He said, noting the work explores the dilemma between civilization and the individual, along with many, many other themes.
Yeah.
He says this work is facing the Godzilla theme head on. That's absolutely true. But I think that it is inevitable that new approaches are taken to Godzilla, and it's inevitable that we have new films like this in the Godzilla series that are expanding the style of Godzilla films. This anime series, and of course the first one, Planet of Monsters, this was the first expansion of style for the Godzilla movies since the year 2000, with Godzilla vs. Megaguirus. That is, when I did my analysis, Megaguirus was the last time before this anime series that the Godzilla movies actually had an expansion of style.
That's interesting.
I'm excluding every movie from the Godzilla series between Megaguirus and Planet of the Monsters in 2017. So from my estimation, the way I view the Godzilla series, this is the first expansion of style in 17 years.
Wow. That's an interesting perspective to have on that. It definitely makes the films more unique, that's for sure.
Yeah, and the reason why I don't include even Shin Godzilla in that is because Shin Godzilla takes after the 1954 film, first and foremost. And after 84.
Yeah.
So that's not really an expansion of style. It's reinventing style that's already there before in a very good way. So you're reinforcing style more than you're expanding style. I believe we needed these anime movies. There's been a lot of reinforcing going on because only about 1/3 of the Godzilla movies expand the style of Godzilla.
That's an interesting way of thinking. Yeah,
it's a YouTube exclusive that I did that explains all of this, and there are a bunch of different charts that I made, all these little cluster charts. The anime movies are absolutely an expansion of style for the Godzilla series. Stylistically, artistically, story-wise, mood-wise.
Absolutely.
They reinforce a lot of stuff too, but they do it in such a different and new way that it's incredible. So that's my take on it.
It's really quite fascinating to see just how brave they were getting with these films. And right now is a pivotal moment in Godzilla's history, because if the character becomes stale now, it's going to be a problem. Because we're getting towards the this big build up with the Legendary Pictures thing, and we're not quite sure if they're going to keep making films after 2020, and we have the potential for more Toho films after that. And if those films are going to happen, then the character needs to kind of try some new things, and whether it keeps those new things going forward or not is an entirely different discussion / debate. But trying new things and experimenting is really going to be pivotal, and as long as those things kind of remain true to like what Godzilla kind of feels like, and even kind of expanding beyond that a little bit and taking some risks, if that happens, then and it's done effectively, like I honestly feel like it is done in these anime films, Godzilla will survive. Godzilla will continue to go for another 65 years. I mean, this is 65 years this year. And like I said before, we're getting close to 36 movies.
Yeah.
That is insane. And all of that, and they're all wonderful in their own ways. A new Godzilla movie comes out, I'm going to watch it no matter what, but I respect the desire to do something new and unique, and I respect the desire to take those risks, present something that's tonally, visually, artistically not only unique, but it's the first time it's been done with the franchise. And, regardless of what anybody out there might think of the anime Godzilla films, whether they don't like them, whether they don't really have a strong opinion on them or not, or whether they love them, it doesn't particularly matter. What really cannot be argued is that they absolutely expanded upon the formula, they expanded upon the style, and they've expanded and added to the mythos of Godzilla in a really important way and at an important time in the character's history.
And
when it needs that.
All this stuff with the cycles, the philosophy of Godzilla, the inevitability of Godzilla, these are timeless concepts. You can plug these concepts into all of these previous movies in one way or another. So by expanding the philosophy of Godzilla, it makes us so much more appreciative of the fact that Godzilla is big and all-encompassing and can't be pegged down as one specific thing or another specific thing.
And that's really the beautiful thing about Godzilla as a character, is that he can be many different things to many different people in many different eras, different decades, different countries that are making the films, different companies that are making them, different people that are writing them, directing them, presenting them visually. And the really beautiful thing about the character is that with such an all-encompassing huge number of genres alone that are tackled, I mean, we've talked about it before, about how many different genres Godzilla's tackled. All of them are different, all of them are unique, and all of them are equally valid. All of them are equally deserving of discussion and enjoyment. And of course, for each individual person, it's going to vary. One person might like Dark Godzilla better than Hero Godzilla, or vice versa. Someone might like this or that as opposed to that or this. But in the end, it's not, it's all about the fact that all of these very, very different things, in the end, are equally as valid as the other. You know what I mean? The characters that we see, especially Godzilla himself, and just the various different roles that he's played and the different positions he's held in the various stories that he's been in, like all of those things hold up in their own unique way, and all of them can be enjoyed in their own unique ways, and it all works.
Economic figures of note, now that we're ending part 3. In 2017, the Japanese GDP grew 1.6%, and in 2018, the Japanese gross domestic product grew 1.0%. Well, we have given the Godzilla community a very good but very meaty discussion about what these anime movies have given us to dissect. Daniel, thank you once again for coming on the show to spread the good news about this anime series. Daniel is the man behind the Godzilla novelization project. The address on the web is godzillanovelizationproject.wordpress.com. It is a very good site. It has the awesome timeline that Daniel talked about too, which is very cool. I have looked at it. This episode is dedicated to the actor Ren Osugi, and he is well known in the Godzilla fandom as the man who played Prime Minister Seiji Okochi in Shin Godzilla. The next episode of this podcast will be 1964's Dogora the Space Monster. So we're getting right back on track with classic Toho tokusatsu and non-Godzilla kaiju movies. I'd like to send a shout out to our patrons Kyoe Toshi and Sean Stiff. Kyoe donated at the Kaiju Scholar level, and Sean donated at the Kaiju Visionary level. Thank you for your support. I really appreciate it. Donating is worth it. It gives you the inside track to what's going on in the show, and you get to message me personally. If you'd like to send some feedback, I'd love to hear from you. The email address is feedback@kaijuvision.com. You can also follow the podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Kaijuvision Radio is available on Google Play, iTunes, Stitcher, Blueberry, TuneIn, Podcast Addict, YouTube with Scenic videos, and on Kaijuvision.com. If you like the podcast, please donate on Patreon. I'm Brian Scherschel.
I'm Daniel DiManna.
And this is KVR, Kaijuvision Radio. See you next time.